Hey everybody, welcome to the fifth roundtable, the fifth Fraud Prevention Roundtable series. This is episode 5, Get a Grip, how a former fraudster develops effective fraud prevention strategies for merchants, fintechs, financial industries, and all across the board. You'll see that there's a lot of similar components that exist throughout the marketplace, and it's our goal here today to outline those similarities and see how we can drill down from a high level and see what methods can be most effective for your operation. So in a minute here, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself for the people who are unfamiliar with me. While I do that, I'm going to ask that everybody type in your industry in the chat, so that way I know where to target this content, and I know that, you know, kind of what realm to stay in. So while you guys do that, oh, and also let me know what region you're in. If you're in the United States, if you're in India, Australia, that's important information. So go ahead and let me know what industry you're in and where you're coming in from. And for everybody else, my name is Alexander Hall. I'm the owner of Dispute Defense Consulting, and I'm the host of the Fraud Prevention Roundtable series. I have 15 years of experience. 10 of those years were spent operating as a fraudster. In 2017, my daughter was born, and I decided, hey, I need to change my ways, and I joined the ranks of fraud prevention. In 2020, I founded Dispute Defense Consulting, and now I work with merchants, banks, fintech, iGaming, crypto. I work with everybody developing fraud prevention strategies. I also work with vendors, fellow fraud prevention vendors in our space in various SME capacities. So that ranges everywhere from assessments of their software out to training, where, you know, I will come in and I'll attack the software and I'll introduce sandboxed ideas that can challenge the software. We move forward from that into product management, sales strategy, marketing directives, and so on. And I also work with publications regarding blogs, articles, public speaking engagements. I work with associations to do public speaking and webinars, things like that. So that's me in a nutshell. Let's see what we got here. We got calling in from Nordstrom in Colorado, e-commerce, ticketing and attractions. Oh, Randy. Hey, Randy. North America e-commerce, financial institutions. Ismail, good to see you again, man. Okay, cool. Fintech, good. All right, so it's a widespread, pretty fun to talk about. For the purposes of this content, I'm going to center everything around e-commerce, and then we're going to bridge out, because e-commerce is what we're most familiar with. We're going to bridge out into the other industries and start to talk about unique use cases. So thank you guys for your engagement over there. Here we go. So the first step in the development of fraud prevention strategy, at least for me, is we need to identify the similarities between the methods. And for this, I've come up with a little exercise. With the wide spread of industries that are represented here, go ahead and think about your favorite fraud method. Not your favorite, of course, but, you know, the most interesting one, or the first one that comes to mind, whatever you want to do. Think about that method. That could be transaction fraud, it could be ATOs, it could be leveraging identity information for ATOs, it could be leveraging compromised identity information for credit applications, mortgage, so on and so forth. It could be in-store payments, right? Counterfeit material in-store. Think about what that is, get it in your head. 99% of the methods out there can be defined using one sentence. That sentence is, it is nothing more than a request accompanied by information. Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. If you think about transaction fraud, the platform is the checkout form, right? And in that checkout form, any user is able or has the ability to make a request, right? Process a payment accompanied by compromised information. Okay, well, that's the most straightforward one. That's the one we're most familiar with. Let's go over to ATOs. Well, it's the same thing. You go to a login screen, and now you're making a request to log in, and you're submitting compromised login details. The information is the login details. Let's take it a step further and talk about financing and credit lines. The request is to fulfill and put through this application in hopes of being approved, but you're using compromised identity information, right? So if we zoom out and we think about this, what we're able to see and what we should be able to discern with any operation that you're focusing on is where the potential for requests are. So if I'm looking at an e-commerce merchant, or if I'm looking at an e-commerce operation, I'd immediately think, well, the first request happens when somebody tries to make an account. That makes sense. You're trying to make an account on the platform. Okay, so that's a request to make an account, and you're submitting email, phone number, maybe shipping address, whatever it may be, or maybe it's coinciding with the checkout form because it's all in one. You know what I'm saying? The request is to make an account, and the information varies. Okay, moving on from there, we have the checkout form. That's the one most people are familiar with. Moving on from there, and very little attention is given to this, but this was my specialty back in the day, was social engineering at the customer service or the sales center, right? Anybody who's customer facing. The idea is, with customer service, I can request varying access to an account. I can request, maybe manual transactions be put through, manual checkouts through telling someone the credit card information over the phone or whatever it may be. Making requests to established accounts or established transactions. So a fraudster might put through a transaction with information that doesn't really align with what he needs or he or she needs. And then they call customer service and ask for that to be adjusted. So at the customer service level or the sales level, you have a lot of different requests that can come through there, a lot of different adjustments that can be made to an account or to a transaction, and what information is being asked for. Okay, moving down the line from there, you have returns, you have refunds, what information is being, or what is the request, and what information is being asked for. And then moving down the line from there, you have chargebacks, which, depending on the situation, if it's a dishonest consumer filing a false chargeback, chargeback abuse, friendly fraud, first party fraud, whatever it may be, it's still a request associated with information. The information is just a statement saying, hey, we didn't receive this. So the reason I went into all that detail is because I wanted to properly articulate that the majority of methods out there, we can look down on them with magnifying glasses, and we can get microscopes out and really get granular with the way it all played out. But when you zoom out, you start to see everything is just a request accompanied by typically compromised information. Okay, so what does that mean for us? Well, as I just highlighted, if you go through the customer experience journey and you list all of the ways that all of the places, all of the platforms wherein a request can be made and can affect the company, you've got it. It's right there. So now you know all of the attack vectors wherein a user might, or a fraudster might, come in and attack your company. Okay, so where do we go from there? No, not where do we go from there. I'm sorry. I wanted to go over an overview of the 3 pillars. So I've done the series on 3 pillars, but for people who have missed that, I want to touch on it just a little bit. So the 3 pillars of a fraudster's operation are identity information, payment information, and system knowledge. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about system knowledge, just a couple of weeks ago, so I won't go into too much detail, but here's what it boils down to. If you look at any engagement between a user and a company, they're either submitting PII, an email, a phone number, a shipping address, a name, whatever it might be, or social security number if we're in fintech or financial institutions. They're submitting PII. Well, if a fraudster gets a hold of a mountain of PII, doesn't it make sense that they could put through a mountain of transactions, a mountain of engagements? Right. Moving forward from there, you have payment information. Well, at what point does payment information come into the process flow or come into the flow? If you're in store, if you're e-commerce, if you're Moto, mail order, telephone order, if you are third-party apps, what are the ways in which payment information is being transacted with? Okay, fine, cool, makes sense. And then system knowledge. That's where the fraudsters, pen testing and troubleshooting and going through trial and error in order to discover what the verification process is when they submit a request accompanied by information, which brings us to the next point. As you go and you begin to identify all of the requests that are capable to be made with your company and influence the operation of your company, the next question should be what information is being requested, and then the next question should be what information is being verified. And when you get to that point, you begin to start to think about what information is being gathered. Okay, so that's where we're going. So all of this was a build up to talk about the context. Now we're going to drill into the actual strategy development process. So with that, it's important to I understand the elements of the important elements of what I consider an effective fraud prevention strategy. So let's get into them. The 3 points are, they should be holistic. Your strategy should be holistic. It should be truly end to end. Now, I understand that in the marketing world of fraud prevention, people say end to end and they mean account sign up and they mean chargebacks at the beginning and at the end. Okay, semantically, you can say those words and it mean end to end. I understand. However, true end-to-end holistic fraud prevention, strategy takes into consideration every touch point in every possible way that a user, yet undefined as to whether or not it's a customer or a fraudster, every touch point wherein they stand to affect and influence the operation of a company, right? It makes sense. That's true end-to-end. That's true holistic. Everything is taken into consideration, all of these touch points. 2, and we'll get back to that on strategy items, but I want to make sure I list these. 2 is reporting. As you identify what touch points are available, you need to report on the performance of those touch points. What does a strange request look like in context A? What does a strange request look like at touch point B in context B? You know what I'm saying? Like you have to think outside the box. There is no one out there who knows everything about fraud. That's why it's important to zoom out, get an overview, and then start to drill down. We get lost in the weeds a lot, and reporting is going to help us track and monitor the performance at each touch point. Now, as I've experienced and with the thousands of people that I've spoken with, there becomes a problem when, start to track velocity and maybe tracking bot attacks and things like that. Yeah. Are we back? Okay. Thank you. Are we back now? We're good? Back. All right. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Isaac. Okay, so where was I before it cut out? What was the last thing? I think we got to silos, right? Thank you, everyone. Lost you speaking and it's playing intro music. No. Okay, there's a little bit of a delay, so as I read the comments. So anyway, I'll go back up to the siloed, non-siloed. Okay. So the biggest question whenever I talk to fraud analysts is they feel like they're only given access to 1, 2, or 3 components of a thing, of an operation, right? And whenever people come in and they start talking about new methods and new problems and things like that, that's when the C-suite and that's when the managers say, oh, well, it looks to me like everybody needs to, now we need to start focusing on the login form for ATOs. Now we need to start focusing on this. That, in my opinion, is a failing way to move forward, because not only do they not have access, so they don't have historical access to these touch points, but now that they get there, they have to now start engaging with the system and finding out what the flow is and discovering it now that it's a problem, right? So it's this proactive versus reactive situation, and it's just not conducive to the world of fraud. Talking about report on performance of the touch points. Okay. So yeah, at the end of the reporting thing, let me just say, track and monitor performance across all touch points, and we'll get back to that. But yeah, so with regards to not being siloed operations, the main problems with that are, right? One, you don't have a full view of all of the ways that fraud can enter the system. As I've outlined 1,000 times, if you don't look at every touch point, you're not going to know where fraud might enter, when it's going to enter, and you're losing precious time in being able to be nimble, right? If it takes 3 months of reporting ATOs across the board before the fraud team gets access to regularly monitor the login form or the account creation form or customer service for social engineered ATOs, what are they going to do 3 months in and then finally have to learn what the process is, what it looks like, and build up? It doesn't make much sense. So in my opinion, the last element is just a non-siloed operation. Give your fraud team access to everything. Okay, so now as we drill down on the holistic touch points and the holistic, I see it more with compromising email first. Oh, sure, yeah, that's where that's the scam part. That's the buildup, right? At the moment of the method being described, that's a good point, Madison. That's the buildup. That's where they're aggregating the data or doing work on the back end. The method is where it happens. So the ATO, the login attempt, they had to build up on the back end in order to gain access to the email so that they could get that OTP or that 2FA or that MFA. And once they get it, or they have the PIN number shot over to them from some social engineering scam, whatever it might be, they built up that information. The trigger point is, now we have the information, we have the PIN number, get into it, right? So 100%, I agree with you completely, Madison. That's an example of building up on the back end the data that needs to be used for the method, right? So when we get into talking about holistic, the idea of holistic and end-to-end, these interchangeable words that everyone loves to use, there are a lot of options out there, right? And I'm going to speak to a few of them. I'll make my suggestion when I approach, say a merchant comes to me and they quickly want an option to just implement. Something's going crazy and I don't typically operate like this. I'm going to do discovery and I'm going to see what their pain points are. But I've been asked to run through this exercise many times. What's the strategy that you would use across the board? Well, there is no silver bullet, so let's be clear about that. But I would say that if you're going from zero and you want to get a decent foundation going and you want to deploy or partner with a holistic data provider, right, data set, my go-to for that is going to be PII for your KYC. Now, you guys in FinTech under PCI and GDPR compliance, that's not really an option for you. There is a vendor. They know who they are. There's only one of them, and that's their tagline. But as far as the scope of the different vendors that are in PII KYC, FinTech and financial institutions, you got one option, and I think one other company is really working to get into that area as well. But my go-to is chargeback representment processing, right? If the volume and the budget calls for it, right? That's at the front end because you want to monitor previous performance. So that's first. See how you've been performing, right? Maybe it's not first, but at the same time, a holistic data set needs to be established. And for that, my go-to is PII for your KYC across all touch points. So why is that? Well, consider the different data sets that are available out there. We have, under the umbrella of holistic data sets, we have session data, pretty straightforward. Covers IP address, MAC address, device or device fingerprinting, which will dive into like browser details, whether or not there's third-party RDPs and things like that. That's one. Moving on from there, you have voice biometrics. Any touch point can be funneled through voice biometrics, and it's easy enough to interact with for the front-facing, like for the customer, and that's great. But the problem is, these are not data points that everyone's associated with. The thresholds for acceptable failure, right? What's the difference between 10 and 100? What's the difference between 1 and 1,000? What's the difference between in that data point over there or that metric? What's up 2 versus -2? What does that mean to us? And then you move forward into fingerprint biometrics, behavioral analytics. You move over into optical, and there's a whole list of holistic data sets that every touch point can be funneled through. But PII, we're all familiar with our own PII. If I look at a list of data sets or data points provided by a PII vendor, I know what it means. I know what a first name is, a last name. I know what an address is. I know what a phone number is. Right as you go down the list, you're familiar with it because you have it. So at a glance, it's relatively easy to discern whether or not something in there is suspicious. Whereas if you look at another data set that's more technical and requires more training, it might be more powerful and more reliable in effect. Don't get me wrong, but it's not easy to get up and running, right? So that's the two elements. The third element is so it's chargebacks, it's PII KYC, and then moving on from there, it would be to use another holistic data set. So like voice, like session data, like behavioral analytics, in order to discern, in order to do the escalation process. So if something through the PII determination comes back as a yellow or an orange, but not quite a red or a green, you need to know where else to send that to get a second opinion, so to speak. So you send it to the specialist, right? You wouldn't go to a specialist and then go to a primary for your health needs. The same thing should apply to your fraud prevention. So as you build up these processes and you verify the information, so on and so forth. So yeah, the first idea was deploying an holistic data set. Now, for those of you who are not in a position to go into automation right now, that's where the importance of the second factor comes into play. You're not only leveraging the information that you ask for in your determination process. So what do I mean by that? When you go to a login form and you just type in a username and a password, your platform typically is receiving a lot more data from that engagement than the user is providing. So what is it getting? Well, there's a lot of session data that's available. Depending on how your website's set up, depending on what platform you use, there's a lot of caveats, but generally speaking, across the board, there's a lot more data that's available on the back end. And so you can have access to like the IP address, the velocity, whether or not there's an RDP, like I had said, the session data. The limitation to that is it's all only in-house data, right? So I heavily suggest partnering with an automated service provider who offers data sets that are compiled across a merchant or a global network in order to see previous performance relative to whatever data point you're leveraging in your determination process. But moving forward from there, across the board, you do have more data available to you than what's typed into the form. And if you consciously start to compile and aggregate that data, you can start to discover trouble and bad actors in your system that are touching down on different engagements across your platform. If this IP address has been a problem across 5 accounts in the past, well, you know to blacklist that IP address. If this email address has taken advantage of your rewards, promotions, discounts across the board, like for you iGaming guys out there, well, you know you should be able to blacklist them, right? You're banking on the lifetime value of the customer, and if they come in and take advantage of your policies and your refunds and your robust discounts trying to get them in the door, but they build 50 accounts and it's all caveats off the same email address, you should feel confident and comfortable in blacklisting that email. Okay, with that, every touch point. So with that, I wanted to drill down into reporting and talk about where we're going to see evidence of fraud at different touch points. So as I just spoke about, your fraud performance is going to be seen everywhere, right? Now, you don't need a report for how many times a login screen had been accessed across one IP address. Yes, it'd be nice to have a velocity check, but that's auxiliary. Let's look at what 2 data sets should be considered when evaluating the fraud performance of a team. Now, the go-to historically has always been chargebacks. Chargebacks dictates how much fraud's in our system. Okay, it's not wrong to say. However, there are a lot more methods out there now, right? And throw into the mix the idea that good customers are now being dishonest. Right? Good customers, not fraudsters, right? The category of fraudsters, are taking advantage of systems thinking, oh, it doesn't matter. It's just that multi-billion-dollar company. Who cares if they lose $100? Who cares if they lose $500? They can take the hit. They'll just write it off. That mindset is causing a lot of trouble. So I just did a webinar going into deep detail on this on another platform, but the gist is we now have to roll our reporting out across all performance in the policies, right? So what policies? Refunds, refund exploits, return exploits, credit line exploits, all of these things, right, are under the policy category. And we need to put check marks in place, or we need to put checks in place that allow us to verify whether or not these systems are being abused, right? So we need to expand outside of chargebacks. Now, to be clear, there's two types of fraud that are going to be identified under chargebacks. In chargebacks, you have true fraud, and then you have friendly fraud or first-party fraud or chargeback abuse or whatever the flavor of the day is that we want to call it. And then from there, you have operational failures where the company wasn't able to hold up their end of the bargain or made a mistake, whatever it is. Those are the three primary categories of chargebacks that we see across the board. There's more, but those are the three primary ones. And if we're conscious about what we're looking for in there, we'll be able to see it. Okay, so there's chargebacks. There's refunds and policy abuse. There's all that. And then moving forward from there is team development and training. So the non-siloed element. It's super important that we stay diligent in our learning, which is why I'm so glad you guys are here with me today. I love chatting with you guys, and please blow up the chat. Let's start a conversation. I think I'm running out of content, and we're only halfway through the time. So feel free. Let's throw something in the chat and get going. But the non-siloed approach, the reason why training is so important is because we need to know exercises that we can run individually on our own, right? It helps to understand what fraud is happening out in the marketplace, and it helps to build software and processes that are directly tied to the methods that are being identified and defined out in the marketplace. It's great. There's no problem with that. In addition to that, we have to understand that with emerging technology, thank you, Madison, that with emerging technology, new scenarios and the way that technology interacts with other technology, the fraud analyst, the fraud manager, all the way up to the CFO, you have to have a real good understanding of what your operation is doing and how your different touch points are interacting with each other, how your team is responding to your needs. Yes, learn about what's going on down the street and see if it's happening with you. Don't let me discredit that. But the ability to also isolate yourself from the world and look inward to find out what's affecting your system is the most important thing, in my opinion. And who am I? But if you compare, and to really outline this, if you compare financial institution A to financial institution B, where do the similarities end? In my opinion, they end pretty quickly. Yes, I can expect to attack the same, processes, the same forms, and try to get the same results out of either, whether that's creating a mule account or creating a line of credit, ATOing account and establishing an authorized user, using third-party ATOs to drain a funding account into a fintech account that was created under false pretenses. All of those methods apply to the financial industry as it relates to other industries. Cool, great. But everyone has their own process. Everyone, one company might take precedence on data point A and rank that higher than data point B. Every company is a little bit different, and those similarities end relatively quickly. That's why it's super important for, merchants, everybody, all you guys. It's super important for you guys to look inward, track all your touch points, make sure that you have holistic data sets in place, report and monitor the performance, and make sure that your fraud team is not isolated to any one or two or three areas. There is no fraud department. Fraud lives everywhere, right? I'm telling you this, right? Fraud lives at every engagement that a user can have with the company. So for you to close the door and behind lock and key for your fraud team is I'll say it, to me, that's ridiculous. So expand their reach. Let them look at what's going on and discern what's going on and use their big brains and imaginations to see what's happening across the system. with all that, that was it. That's all I had. I guess this is a really short one. I didn't outline as many notes. So let me go ahead and just I'll recap quickly, give a little summary, so that way we're not. I know you guys took time out of your day to be here, and I don't want to cut it too short. So, one, zoom out, takeaways. That's what they're called, takeaways. One, zoom out. Fraud is a request accompanied by information with the intent of influencing the operation of a company. Go apply that mindset anywhere and find all of the opportunities in which a user can make a request, submit information, and affect the back-end operations. So that's one. Two, understand the data that's in play, right? The 3 pillars outlines where you attack and which sets of information, where the fraudster attacks and which sets of information come into play. But you have access to more data than is being provided by the user. So in that case, if you're using in-house data, make sure you really squeeze all of the juice out of the orange that is your data. Get it all, cross-reference it across the platform, and make sure that bad actors are being kept away. And keep and maintain the goal, or maintain and pursue the goal of partnering with a provider once you can afford it with the budget, and once your volume increases. Partner with a vendor that has a merchant-wide network or a global network of data sets that apply to your use cases. Now that's going to be different if you're a merchant in retail, or if you're a fintech or a financial institution under GDPR, all these compliance and regulations things. I'll help you with that. If you want to reach out, have a conversation, let's chat about what your options are. We can talk about the benefits of voice over behavioral analytics, or behavioral analytics over whatever one you want to talk about. We can talk about what's specific to your use case. 3 was 3 was the strategy elements. So yeah, in my opinion, an effective in-house strategy before we get into automation must have effective reporting, must have an holistic data set to be employed across each touch point. Think about this. If you have 10 doors and one of them is being opened, and you buy a software that focuses on that one door, what happens when the third door opens and people start walking through? Oh, shoot, we didn't think about that. We better go hire another team to handle this. And then door 5, and then door 7, and then door 8 and 9 to 10. No. Get one software, leverage it across all your touch points, and just don't worry about it until there's a problem. When you see 1 or 2, 3, 4 examples of bad stuff happening at door number 5, flip it on. Flip it on. Seems relatively straightforward to me. So holistic, every touch point, everyone. Get everyone accounted for, and just don't go through the processing for each one. There's that. Reporting must be extensive across each touch point in the performance, and your team needs to be trained on how to identify irregularities and suspicious activity, which I can help with if you'd like. Shameless pitch. And then non-siloed. Make sure your fraud team has access to everyone. Every department wherein someone interacts wherein the user has an opportunity to interact with the company. So there's that. Let me go through these comments and see if we got any questions or any thoughts. You were talking about the report. Oh, okay. Thank you, Ismail. Email randomize. Yeah. Derek says, text message or phone calls are very common now using telephone spoofing. The consumer thinks it's the financial calling and falls. Yeah. So that's one thing that where my scope is a little bit limited. I never took advantage of person-to-person scams. I was never involved in that. If I shook your hand, I never took advantage of you. If I never went to some old lady and tried to hustle her out of money, that's pathetic. However, it was a false rationalization because I would use the same check or credit card of that old lady and use it to go pay for a laptop. You know what I'm saying? Like it's ridiculous. But when it comes to true scams as it's defined in our industry, I never participated in that, so I don't have much to say. Although reading the reports and reading the articles, it's pretty straightforward how gullible some victims are. It is. It's too sad. Thank you for making that point, Derek. Madison, I think proper training is the best. Yeah, 100%. I'm putting together a training module. It's almost done. Wherein I talk about method development, the 3 pillars, strategy development items, so on and so forth, centered around a particular operation. So Madison, if you'd like to have a conversation about that, you just let me know. Jonas Hamdi asks, I'm curious, how important do you think it is to know who is coming through the front door at sign up? Do companies even care? Or quantity is better than the quality of signing? So that is a good question. There are vendors out there who are not, so okay, initially there's this gap, right? We in the industry, in the community, we always not fight, but we pursue the ability to drive home the value of fraud prevention for people who don't see the value. Right now, historically, across the board, the reports indicate that fraud losses for any company averages out to be less than 1%. Less than 1%. That's like insane to think about how much fraud there is in the world, and merchants typically report less than 1% of their revenue as fraud. It's crazy. It's crazy to consider that. Anyway, when someone comes in or tries to come in, and we close the door, and we look out the window and we say, hey, that's Billy Bob from, whatever, down the street. Doesn't matter who it is. But we identify him. And then we see him walking up the street. We're like, oh, here comes Billy Bob. Close the door. Close the door. Close the door. That's typically the idea that we sell. Get the door closed, lock the door, don't let Billy Bob in. Okay. The idea there is we're identifying that we're expecting to see Susan, but Billy Bob's here. Well, that's not Susan, so don't let him in. Okay, fine. There are vendors now that are moving to the next point. The next point being, hey, we're expecting Susan. That's Billy Bob. Close the door. Let me make a note and tell the police. Billy Bob's out here acting like Susan, right? That point in the equation, or that point in this weird analogy that I just came up with, is being implemented. And I like to see that, because that's what's going to help us identify and shut down rings that are out there. There's a lot of different ways that it's happening. These holistic data sets that are compiling and aggregating data across merchant networks and global networks are getting this information together, and they're finding similarities. And I'll give this to you guys. When I was operating as a bad guy, for the thousands of sets of payment information and identity information that I had access to, I did not have thousands of devices. I did not create thousands of virtual devices, virtual desktops. I didn't create thousands of hotspots and VPNs. I didn't do that. So if we can identify the hardware that people are using, I feel like that's going to help us paint a picture. Now, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of ways to spoof hardware, and I understand that. But you can start to see similarities between the spoofed information. This. Okay, maybe that's a bad thing, right? A lot of traffic is coming out of Istanbul, but we don't know this, but the person's in Florida claiming to, all of these VPNs and all the crazy hardware spoofing stuff, right? Like all of these scenarios are popping in my head. But anyway, I like what some vendors are doing, because they're working with law enforcement to identify organized rings. And in order to do that, it's going good. It's going good. Even cares quantity. Yeah. So the quality of who is signing up. Yeah, that's what it is. The goal is to just identify that the person is who they claim to be, and to let them through with limited friction. Yeah, that's the goal. And I don't blame merchants for maintaining that. It's on the vendors to really compile that information and get it across to identify Billy Bob walking up the street and get that report out to people. Absolutely, Madison. Yeah, completely. All right. If that's it, I'd like to sound like someone at a podium and say, I'll go ahead and field questions if you have any questions. But yeah, I guess that's it. This is a quick session. 10:40. Yeah, so I'll give you guys 20 minutes of your time back. Thank you so much for being here. I Oh, as a reminder, all of the Fraud Prevention Roundtable videos are on the Dispute Defense page. So remember to, what do they say? Like, follow, connect with me on LinkedIn, follow the Dispute Defense page so you can stay updated with all great information. If you're interested in consulting, training, marketing initiatives, public speaking engagements, feel free to reach out to me. Or if you're a vendor or a merchant and you want to have a conversation about coming on to the roundtable and discussing your perspective, your experience, the challenges that you see, the successes that you've implemented in your past, I'd love to have these types of conversations. So, Jerry, thank you. Yeah, I love having conversations. So feel free to follow, connect, and shoot me a message. Let's hop on a call and chat. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great day.